after all the talk about her money. She had tears in her eyes when she bade me farewell, and she sent a kind message home to mother, and promised to come again at Christmas, if she could win permission. Upon the whole, my opinion was that she had behaved uncommonly well for a maid whose self-love was outraged with spirit, and proper pride, and yet with a great endeavor to forgive, which is, meseems, the hardest of all things to a woman outside of her own family. After this, for another month, nothing worthy of notice happened, except of course that I found it needful, according to the strictest good sense and honor, to visit Lorna immediately after my discourse with mother, and to tell her all about it. My beauty gave me one sweet kiss with all her heart, as she always did when she kissed at all, and I begged for one more to take to our mother, and before leaving I obtained it. It is not for me to tell all she said, even supposing, what is not likely, that any one cared to know it, being more and more particular to ourselves and no one else. But one thing that she said was this, and I took good care to carry it, word for word, to my mother and Annie. I never can believe, dear John, that after all the crime and outrage wrought by my reckless family, it ever can be meant for me to settle down to peace and comfort in a simple household. With all my heart I long for home, any home, however dull and wearisome, to those used to it, would seem a paradise to me, if only free from brawl and tumult, and such as I could call my own. But even if God would allow me this, in lieu of my wild inheritance, it is quite certain that the Doones never can and never will. Again, when I told my mother how mother and Annie, as well as myself, longed to have her at Plowler's Barrows, and teach her all the quiet duties in which she was sure to take delight, she only answered with a bright blush, that while her grandfather was living she would never leave him, and that even if she were free, certain ruin was all she could bring to any house that received her, at least within the utmost reach of her amiable family. This was too plain to be denied, and seeing my dejection at it, she told me bravely that we must hope for better times, if possible, and asked how long I would wait for her. Not a day, if I had my will, I answered very warmly, at which she turned away confused, and would not look at me for a while. But all my life, I went on to say, if my fortune is so ill, and how long would you wait for me, Lorna? Till I could get you, she answered slyly, with a smile which was brighter to me than the brightest wit could be. And now, she continued, you bound me, John, with a very beautiful ring to you, and when I dare not wear it, I carry it always in my heart. But I will bind you to me, you dearest, with the very poorest and plainest thing that ever you set eyes on. I could give you 50 fairer ones, but they would not be honest, and I love you for your honesty, and nothing else, of course, John. So don't be conceited. Look at it. What a queer old thing. There are some ancient marks upon it, very grotesque and wonderful. It looks like a cat in a tree almost, but never mind what it looks like. This old ring must have been a giant's. Therefore it will fit you perhaps, you enormous John. It has been on the front of my old glass necklace, which my grandfather found them taken away, and very soon made them give back again. Ever since I can remember, and long before that, as some woman told me. Now you seem very greatly amazed. Pray, what thinks my lord of it? That is worth 50, of the pearl thing which I gave you, you darling, and that I will not take it from you. Then you will never take me. That is all. I will have nothing to do with a gentleman. No gentleman? Dear, a yeoman? Very well. A yeoman. Nothing to do with a yeoman who will not accept my love gage. So if you please, give it back again, and take your lovely ring back. She looked at me in such a manner, half in earnest, half in jest, and 3 times 3 in love, that in spite of all good resolutions and her own faint protests, I was forced to abandon all firm ideals, and kiss her till she was quite ashamed, and her head hung on my bosom, with the night of her hair shield over me. Then I placed the pearl ring back on the soft elastic bend of the finger she held up to scold me, and on my own smallest finger drew the heavy hoop she had given me. I considered this with satisfaction, until my darling recovered herself, and then I began very gravely about it, to keep her, if I could, from chiding me. Mistress Lorna, this is not the ring of any giant. It is nothing more nor less than a very ancient thumb ring, such as once in my father's time was plowed up out of the ground in our farm, and sent to learned doctors, who told us all about it, but kept the ring for their trouble. I will accept it, my own one love, and it shall go to my grave with me, and so it shall, unless there be villains who would dare to rob the dead. Now I have spoken about this ring, though I scarcely meant to do so, and would rather keep to myself things so very holy, because it holds an important part in the history of my Lorna. I asked her where the glass necklace was from which the ring was fastened, and which she had worn in her childhood, and she answered that she hardly knew, but remembered that her grandfather had begged her to give it up to him when she was 10 years old or so, and had promised to keep it for her until she could take care of it, at the same time giving her back the ring, and fastening it from her pretty neck, and telling her to be proud of it. And so she always had been, and now from her sweet breast she took it, and it became John Ridd's delight. All this, or at least great part of it, I told my mother truly, according to my promise, and she was greatly pleased with Lorna for having been so good to me, and for speaking so very sensibly. And then she looked at the great gold ring, but could not by no means interpret it, only she was quite certain, as indeed I myself was, that it must have belonged to an ancient race of great consideration and high rank in their time, upon which I was for taking it off, lest it should be degraded by a common farmer's finger. But mother said, "No," with tears in her eyes. If the common farmer had won the great lady of the ancient race, what were rings and old world trinkets when compared to the living jewel? Being quite of her opinion in this, and loving the ring, which had no gem in it, as the token of my priceless gem, I resolved to wear it at any cost, except when I should be plowing, or doing things likely to break it, although I must own that it felt very queer, for I never had throttled a finger before, and it looked very queer for a length of time upon my great hard-working hand. And before I got used to my ring, or people could think that it belonged to me, plain and ungarnished though it was, and before I went to see Lorna again, having failed to find any necessity, and remembering my duty to mother, we all had something else to think of, not so pleasant and more puzzling. End of chapter 35.